The studio lights were warmer than usual, or maybe it just felt that way as Blake Shelton took his seat across from George Stephanopoulos. Morning shows had a certain glow to them, bright smiles, polished banter, and the quiet hum of production moving like a well-oiled machine. Blake had done this countless times. He knew where to look, when to laugh, how long to pause before answering. Still, as he adjusted the brim of his cap and glanced around the Good Morning America set, there was a faint tension in his chest he couldn't quite explain. George opened with an easy smile, welcoming viewers back from a commercial break. His voice was calm, practiced, reassuring. He congratulated Blake on his recent success, mentioning sold-out shows and a loyal fan base that spanned generations. Blake chuckled, offering a relaxed response, cracking a quick joke about country music and early wake-up calls. The audience laughed on cue, and for a moment, everything felt exactly as it always did, friendly, predictable, safe. Then George pivoted. He referenced a recent interview Blake had done elsewhere, repeating a quote that had already sparked debate online. George's tone remained neutral, even respectful, but the words carried weight. Blake felt it immediately. The smile stayed on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. He shifted slightly in his chair, one boot tapping against the floor as he considered how to respond. At first, Blake answered carefully. He clarified what he'd meant, explaining the context behind the comment. His voice was steady, his delivery smooth, but something underneath it had begun to tighten. George listened, nodding, then followed up with another question, gentler on the surface, sharper beneath. It was the kind of question that suggested there was more to uncover, more to challenge. Blake's jaw set. He leaned forward just a little, elbows resting on his knees, signaling a change in posture that the cameras caught instantly. The room seemed to grow quieter, even though nothing had technically changed. Blake spoke again, slower this time, emphasizing certain words, making it clear he wasn't interested in letting his answer be trimmed down to a soundbite. "I think people forget," he said, "that a conversation isn't a headline." George raised his eyebrows slightly, not in disbelief, but curiosity. He attempted to reframe the discussion, suggesting that public figures had a responsibility to be mindful of how their words might land. It was a reasonable point, delivered with professionalism. But Blake heard something else in it, an implication that he hadn't been careful enough, that he'd brought the scrutiny on himself. The temperature in the studio shifted. Blake straightened up, his voice firm now, no longer wrapped in humor. He talked about years in the industry, about being misunderstood, about watching his words get stripped of intention and repackaged for clicks. He wasn't shouting. That was what made it more intense. Every sentence landed with precision, each pause deliberate. Behind the cameras, a producer subtly gestured to another, eyes flicking between Blake and George. This wasn't in the rundown. Morning television thrived on energy, but not this kind. The audience sat still, unsure whether to react, their applause signs momentarily forgotten. George tried to interject, offering a measured response, but Blake continued, his focus locked in. He spoke about authenticity, about refusing to perform a version of himself that made others comfortable at the expense of truth. His southern drawl, usually easygoing, carried a sharper edge now, like steel wrapped in velvet. For a split second, the room felt suspended in time. George's expression remained composed, though there was a flash of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected the conversation to veer this far off script. Still, he nodded, allowing Blake to finish. It was a professional courtesy, but also a strategic one. Cutting him off would only escalate things further. Blake finally paused, inhaling deeply. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, stretching longer than anyone expected. A few members of the audience shifted in their seats. Someone let out a nervous laugh, quickly stifled. George spoke again, choosing his words carefully. He acknowledged Blake's perspective, emphasizing the importance of dialogue and differing viewpoints. His tone softened, as if trying to ease the tension back into something manageable. But the moment had already changed. The easy morning show rhythm was gone, replaced by something raw and unpredictable. Blake listened, eyes steady, then nodded once. When he responded, there was no anger in his voice, just resolve. He said he welcomed tough conversations, but only when they were fair. He wasn't there to play a role or deliver rehearsed lines. He was there to be himself, even if that made the room uncomfortable. The camera cut briefly to a wide shot, capturing both men in the frame. The contrast was striking, George composed and anchored in his seat, Blake leaning forward, fully present, unapologetic. Viewers at home could feel it through their screens, that sense that something unscripted was unfolding in real time. As the seconds ticked by, a stage manager quietly signaled that they were running long. The band sat ready in the background, instruments untouched, waiting for a cue that didn't come. Blake glanced toward the side of the set, then back at George, as if daring the conversation to continue. The exchange hadn't exploded yet, but the fuse was lit, and everyone in the studio knew it.